The first thing I saw when I got back to Northridge Estates was a steel fence chained across my only road home and Andrea Bell standing next to it like she'd just cut a ribbon at some grand opening for absolute stupidity. I'm not kidding. There I was, rolling in after an overnight drive, dead tired, smelling like gas station coffee and highway dust, and this woman had the nerve to block the only access to my cabin with a laminated HOA notice zip tied to the gate. You ever have a moment so ridiculous your brain just refuses to process it at first? Yeah, that was mine. Rick had called me the day before while I was halfway across Tennessee, and his voice was tight, wrong somehow, and Rick was not a man who got rattled easy. I mean, the guy patched a roof during a hurricane warning once and treated it like a lazy Saturday project. So when he said, "Jace, you better get back here. The HOA just put a fence across your access road," I knew this wasn't some petty complaint about mailbox paint or roof shingles. This was different. Northridge Estates sat right outside Asheville, tucked deep into the wooded hills, where people usually kept to themselves unless they had a real good reason not to. My cabin was at the far end of a gravel road that peeled off from the main HOA lane and curved through the trees. And let's be clear, that road was not decorative, it was not symbolic. And it sure as hell wasn't one of those fake, shared community features people like Andrea love to talk about in meetings. It was the only way in and out of my property. So when I turned that last bend the next morning and saw a rail steel gate, thick chain, heavy lock, drilled posts, the whole deal, I just sat there behind the wheel for a second and stared at it. Then I saw Andrea. She was wearing one of those beige cardigans she always wore, clutching a clipboard to her chest like it was the literal Constitution, standing there with that calm little expression people get when they think paperwork makes them untouchable. I got out of the truck, walked up to the fence, and asked the most obvious question in the world, "What is this?" She didn't smile. "That fence is a compliance measure." I looked at the chain, then back at her. "Compliance with what?" "Our updated HOA access regulations," she said, as if that explained everything. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes that's just what comes out when somebody says something so stupid it doesn't fit in your head right away. "You fence my road," I said, pointing at the dirt. "It's a shared access corridor," she replied, her voice as flat as the paper she was holding. "No," I told her, feeling the heat rise in my neck. "It's my property." That was when she tapped the clipboard, that signature little tap-tap, and said the board had voted on it the week before. No notice, no call, no meeting reminder. Nothing. According to Andrea, the board had quietly decided my cabin didn't fit the neighborhood's updated aesthetic guidelines, so now they were restricting access until they reviewed the structure. My cabin in the woods, which had been there longer than most of these people, somehow offended the visual sensibilities of folks who thought fake stone mailboxes were the height of class. I grabbed the chain and gave it a pull. Heavy steel, real lock, no bluff in it. "Unlock it," I said. "You'll need board approval first." That sentence right there told me everything I needed to know about Andrea Bell. See, some people like power, but Andrea, she liked performing power. She liked the posture of it, the sound of it, the way other people went quiet when she started reading from piece of paper. Just then, Rick pulled up behind me, climbed out of his truck, and took one look at the gate. "You actually did it," he muttered. Andrea lifted her chin. "The community voted." Rick looked at me, one eyebrow raised. "You hear about that vote, Jace?" "Nope. Funny how that works." Andrea tried to say the discussion was over, but it wasn't. Not even close, because right then, tires rolled over the gravel behind us, and a county deputy eased up the lane in a patrol SUV. Rick must have made the call the second he saw the fence going up. The deputy stepped out slow, taking in the fence, the chain, Andrea, and me. He walked up, put a hand on the gate, and it rattled under his fingers. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Andrea jumped in before I could even draw a breath. "What kom an installiten?" The deputy looked at her, then back at the chain. "Compliance with what, exactly?" "Community access regulations." He turned to me. "You the owner?" "I am." "Your road?" "Yes." Andrea cut in again, her voice getting that shrill edge. "It's a shared corridor under HOA review." He didn't answer her right away. He just leaned in, studied the lock, looked down the road toward my cabin, and then asked the question that started pulling the whole rotten thing apart. Who approved this fence? Andrea said the board did. He nodded once. Got a permit for it? That was the first crack. You could literally see it happen in her face, the way her eyes darted for a split second. This is HOA property enforcement, she stammered. Permits aren't required for internal measures. You sure about that? He asked, tilting his head. She said yes, but she didn't sound sure anymore. Then he asked if she had documentation proving HOA jurisdiction over that specific stretch of road. She started flipping through her clipboard, stalling, trying to turn compliance records into an answer, and finally had to admit she didn't have it on her. The deputy looked at the fence again, then at her, and said, real calm, "Ma'am, HOA rules don't outrank property law." He didn't cut the chain that day, but he didn't need to. By then, the performance was over. Andrea knew it, I knew it, and Rick certainly knew it. The only thing still standing there was the fence. That afternoon, I didn't go home. I couldn't. I drove straight into Asheville and went to the county records office. If you've never been in one of those places, it smells like dust, toner, and old arguments. A clerk pulled the parcel map, rolled it open across the counter, traced the lines with a pen, and said the words I'd already started hoping for. This access corridor belongs entirely to you. I leaned in closer, my heart thumping. You're sure? He tapped the map. No shared easement. HOA boundary stops right back here. They never filed for expansion past this point. There it was, clean and simple. The road was mine, which meant Andrea hadn't just stretched a rule. She'd fenced off land the HOA didn't legally control. I took a photo of the map and called someone I hadn't talked to in years, Carla Mendel. She was a former detective turned private investigator, the kind of woman who could hear one crooked sentence and smell the whole rotten structure behind it. I sent her the image, and she called back a minute later. Jace, if that boundary is right, the HOA doesn't even exist on your property. What does that mean for the fence? I asked. It means that fence is an unlawful obstruction of private access, she said, and I could hear the grin in her voice. And that gets real expensive real fast. That night, I stayed at a motel nearby, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I got a trail cam alert from the edge of my road. I opened the video and watched headlights slide through the dark. A truck stopped at the gate. Someone got out, walked up to the chain, and, get this, they didn't open it. They tightened the lock. They were making sure it stayed shut. That told me everything. Andrea wasn't bluffing. She was committed to this play. So the next morning, I stopped talking and started filing. County zoning office, records department, formal complaint, restricted private access, unpermitted obstruction. Just quiet little keyboard clicks on the other end of those calls. And I swear, those sounds mattered more than the chain, because once something enters the system, it stops being gossip and starts becoming evidence. By afternoon, Carla met me outside the HOA office. Andrea was inside with 2 other board members, sitting behind a desk like she still ran the weather. Carla dropped a folder on the table and introduced herself as someone who read property law for a living. Andrea gave her that thin, condescending little smile. As I told Mr. Jace, this is a private community matter. Actually, Carla said, it's a trespassing matter. Then the front door opened, and in walked a county zoning officer with 2 deputies behind him. The whole room changed. The air just left it. The officer put a parcel map on the desk and said, "We received a serious complaint about a restricted access road." Andrea tried the same line again. "This is HOA business," but he just shook his head. "No, it's county business now." Carla tapped the map. "Your jurisdiction stops here, Andrea. Exactly 20 feet before that gate starts." Andrea started rambling about how the board had voted on the corridor, but Carla shut her down. "That vote doesn't apply outside your boundary. You might as well have voted to fence off the moon for all the legal weight it carries." Then the zoning officer pulled out a bright red cease and desist order and laid it right on the desk. Effective immediately, the HOA was prohibited from enforcing any access restriction on my parcel pending a full legal review. One of the board members looked like he might actually throw up. Andrea just stared at the page, like maybe if she glared hard enough, the law would flinch. It didn't. News spread through Northridge faster than fire through dry brush. By that evening, people were showing up near the fence just to look at it. Miguel from down the road, Charlotte from the general store. Folks who'd been quietly swallowing HOA fines and warnings for years. And once people started talking out loud, it all came spilling out. Bogus notices, selective enforcement, little power plays nobody had challenged because each one, by itself, seemed too small to fight. That night, the crowd moved to the old firehouse hall. Andrea showed up with her clipboard, still trying to act like she had control, but then Evelyn Harwick stood up. Evelyn was a retired county judge who lived in the neighborhood, and she took the room over with about 3 calm sentences. Miguel raised the parcel map issue. Rick asked what rule gave Andrea the right to fence property the HOA didn't own. Carla laid out the jurisdiction line. Andrea called it a matter of interpretation, which, is a cute thing to say when the map is sitting right there in black ink. Then Evelyn said, "We're here to determine whether this board still represents this community." The room got real quiet. There were emergency provisions in the old charter that allowed for a community vote under certain conditions. And suddenly, that's where the whole thing turned. Ballots got passed out. Pens scratched paper. Nobody joked. Nobody whispered. 10 minutes later, the count came back, 63-0. A unanimous vote to dissolve the current HOA board pending legal confirmation. Andrea sat there frozen. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She was just still. Sometimes the loudest sound in a room is the moment a person realizes everybody stopped believing them all at once. Now, most people thought that was the end of it. I thought it was the end of it, but it wasn't. 2 days later, I got a call from the county clerk's office about some unusual account activity involving the HOA. Carla met me downtown, and the clerk slid a transaction sheet across the desk. There it was, $20,000 transferred out of the Northridge Estates HOA account the night after the fence dispute started. The destination? A Florida escrow account. The authorization line? Andrea Bell. Carla looked at the form and whispered, "That's not governance. That's a getaway." Then came the next page. The escrow company was tied to a holding structure used for land acquisition. Another file linked the same account to property activity in our neighborhood. Then another showed a development expansion proposal, and my road was listed right in the middle of it. That was the twist that made the whole puzzle click. The fence had never been about aesthetics. It wasn't about community standards or my visual sensibilities. It was about control. Control the road, control the access. Control the access, position the land. Position the land, and make the development expansion a whole lot easier and more profitable. Andrea hadn't been acting like an HOA tyrant just for the thrill of it. Though I'm sure she enjoyed that part. She'd been trying to turn fake authority into real leverage for a massive payday. Once law enforcement followed the money, things moved fast. Andrea was arrested on fraud and embezzlement charges. The escrow trail led to more filings, more names, and more property manipulation than anybody in Northridge had ever guessed. The county froze the transactions. The court review stopped the development plan cold. And then, finally, came the part I've been waiting for since the second I saw that chain. The county came out to remove the fence. I got there early. Rick was already standing by the gate with his hands in his pockets, looking almost cheerful, which on Rick counted as confetti and fireworks. 2 county workers stepped out of a truck, one of them holding a removal authorization with the county seal stamped at the top. Real official, real final. One worker opened a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters around the chain. Everything went quiet for a heartbeat, and then, clack. That chain dropped to the gravel like a bad idea, finally running out of excuses. Rick let out a long breath and said, "That's the best sound I've heard all week." They unbolted the panels, pulled the posts, loaded the whole ugly mess into the back of the truck, and just like that, my road was open again. Same gravel, same curve through the trees, same cabin waiting at the end of it. No chain, no notice, no Andrea Bell theater production in a beige cardigan. 3 months later, Andrea stood trial in Asheville. The charges were read, the filings were traced, and the money movement was laid bare. The judge ordered full restitution of the community funds, voided the fraudulent filings, and permanently banned Andrea from ever serving on any HOA board in the state of North Carolina. No yelling, no dramatic collapse, just the clean, satisfying sound of folders closing after the ruling. That evening, a bunch of us from the neighborhood gathered on the ridge. There were no speeches, no official ceremony. Somebody brought a grill, somebody else brought drinks, and Rick passed around bottles like he'd been waiting years for a reason to celebrate. The HOA was gone. The fence was gone. And instead of replacing the board with another little kingdom, the neighborhood agreed on something simpler, a voluntary council. No fines, no aesthetic reviews, just neighbors helping neighbors when something actually needed doing. Standing there, looking down that open road, I realized something I wish more people understood sooner. Fake power survives on habit. It survives on people assuming the paperwork must be right because the person holding it sounds confident. But confidence isn't ownership. A vote isn't jurisdiction. And a clipboard, sure as hell, isn't the law. Sometimes the real lesson doesn't hit you in the middle of the fight. It hits you later when everything gets quiet again. Mine was this. A bad system can bully people for years, but the minute someone actually checks the record, the whole thing starts shaking. And once the truth gets traction, it doesn't need a shout. It just keeps moving. So yeah, in the end, karma showed up wearing county boots, carrying bolt cutters, and following the money. Now, I want to ask you something. If an HOA board, a boss, or anybody in a position of power crossed a line that clearly wasn't theirs, would you fight it? Or would you just assume they had the right because they acted like they did? Where do you draw that line between authority and abuse? If you've ever dealt with a power trip, Andrea, in your own life, I want to hear about it. Leave a comment below, share your story, and let's talk about what happens when the little guy finally decides to check the map. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed seeing a bully get what was coming to them. It helps us keep telling these stories. See you in the next one.